Executive Director at Pradhan, Dr. Marcella D'Souza, Director of WTR, Center for Resilient Studies, and Subhatra Singh, Foundation for Ecological Security. I'm going to hand it over to Sreya to kick off the session.
Thank you, Shaili, and thank you to the audience for joining us in this post-lunch graveyard shift, which I hope will turn out to be, as it promises to be, one of the more exciting and energizing sessions, given the brilliant panel that we have here, and their introductions don't do them any justice. I will set a brief context before we direct our questions to the panelists, and in the spirit of keeping this as participatory as we can, we will also leave 10 minutes at the end of the session for audience questions, which I hope will be coming at us quick and fast. So the session today is focuses on economic inclusion programming, and as an organization at the Nudge, we ourselves are in the process of unpacking what exactly economic inclusion programming for the most excluded really translates to. And while we are coming up with our nuanced operational understandings and definitions of this, I think we can agree that basically it refers to a coordinated, multidimensional bundle of interventions that are aimed at individuals and households at the margins in order to increase their incomes, assets. To this, we also add, based on our work and experience with marginalized communities across contexts, quality of life as an additional impact metric that we want to see. So without any further ado, I will dive right in and put Marcella on the spot, if it is possible to put Marcella on the spot. But Marcella comes with years and years of experience and also in steering water. And I'm sure everyone in the room is familiar with the organization and the pioneering work that it has done on management of natural resources. But I want, Marcella, you to speak to particularly some of the tools and the technology that you have used at Water to effectively be able to plan, implement, and assess the efficacy of economic inclusion programs with the most marginalized. And want you to talk a little bit more about CoDrive PD, talk the audience through the climate risk and vulnerability assessment tool that you're using with communities at the margins, and how the generation of the resilience code really helps in sharpening these investments and targeting these interventions to those who most need it.
So thank you for giving me this opportunity to share in also the challenges we've had as we go along. We started observing the issues of climate variability somewhere in the early 2000s. And we were constantly asking us the question, and it began with, because we were asking the question, are we getting the results we want? So talking about inclusion began at about that time, around 2002-03, when we had an internal study done. And mind you, at that time, we were just able to get the villages to come together and implement participatory approaches in a massive way for land management. What we found at that time was we had a good, people were participating actively, but once the project had stopped, those who were small and marginalized were left out. I'm talking about the time of between 1993 and 2000. So we had not yet looked at including even Gram Panchayats at that time. So that was the time we had the assessment. And then we found that the marginalized poor were out of the picture, out of the active picture after the project got over. And then we tried to find out what was the reason. And out of that query we had came out the tool that we call a wealth ranking. It was my women's group who told me, I said, how do we analyze the wealth ranking of the people? We didn't go into community, castes, etc. We said wealth ranking was going to be cutting across all. And they gave me the criteria. The very poor, the poor, which were the larger group, the middle class, and the better off. And what we did was we took the tool to the village, and we follow that process still. We put the tool to the people, and in a Gram Sabha, we get all the households to go and sit into whichever category they think they fit into. So you get a wealth ranking immediately with the community, which is very well accepted because it is objective. And we find it very useful. Once we get that categorization of households by the people, we then ask every 15 households, you select your representative to the village development committee. Nobody has any objection, because earlier we had only the better-offs who were selected. So now there's no objection, it is done in public, 15 households, you select, and what happens is you get a very proportionate representation in the village development committee. No issues about it. After that comes the category of when you have to put in, when the people have to put in a contribution for any benefits they receive, there is a disproportionate representation. Those who are better off pay more, and those who are poor contribute but lesser. It is accepted. So once that happens, then without realizing that there is these divisions taking place, the process continues. At about the same time, we looked at the climate issues, and then we developed our tool, because I'm talking of a tool that was developed in the early, around 2010, 11, 12, we started with it. And we again had to follow the same process. The tool that we have now is called the Co-Drive, is Community-Driven Vulnerability Evaluation. It is done in very close focus group discussions with different categories of households, the better off, the middle class, the poor, and because we already have the wealth ranking. So it is not difficult for us to identify who belongs to which category, but we also have a gender disaggregated group. What I forgot to tell you, when we have the village development committee, the only time when we cast lots is for seeing 50% will be a women representative and 50% will be a male representative. So in the village development committee, that is by casting lots in public. So there's no issue again. So once we have this vulnerability assessment tool, the tool does two things. It first assesses what is the landscape, the resource-based health, the land, the water resources, the biodiversity, and whether the landscape of the village as a whole can handle climate resilience. Because if we don't handle the entire landscape, we will forget about your agriculture being regenerative later. If your land is not protected, if your water is not conserved, if your biodiversity and forests are not protected, your land will soon become poorer because of erosion and various other factors, even if we do more organic practices. So we look at the entire landscape, and now we look at it from a landscape of a bigger watershed, of clusters of villages, because everybody is affecting one another. Having said that, the tool then looks at the resource base, and it looks at the different categories of households for livelihoods. Agriculture, all the different livelihoods over there, and it gives us a disaggregated data of the different categories based on the natural resources, on the physical capital, on the financial capital, the social and the human capital of individual groups, including gender. This helps us to then plan out how do we need to do interventions to take them forward. It goes a little further, just 2 minutes, or half a minute. It goes a little further later is when we do the water stewardship approach. We take the entire landscape. If everybody comes over there, everybody has to benefit. And therefore, if water is harvested in the water stewardship planning, the first allocation goes for drinking water and livestock. Most of the time we have smaller households that are there. The landless poor who have livestock. So livestock is given priority, after which it goes in for planning for agriculture and nature and others. Thank you.
That's fascinating, Marcella. It closely echoes our experiences at the Nudge Institute in driving the poverty graduation approach across different states, where we are also using similar tools like the participatory wealth ranking exercise, the poverty assessment tool, in order to drive a more participatory and community-based identification and targeting of rural poor. Fascinating to hear your insights on this. I'll disrupt the natural flow of things and I'll come straight to Subhrata ji. At FES, we know that it has a rich history of public investments in commons restoration. And more recently, we've been hearing of your engagement with various state governments on driving policy and practice on commons restoration. Could you give us a few examples where this strategy of commons restoration for public good has really made a significant impact on the most marginalized in the states that you've worked with?
Yeah, thank you for inviting me to this forum. And just to share this, the experience on working on commons. And the when we talk about commons, I think Marcella had already shared about the need for this, the forests, the pastures, and why if we are not taking care of it, how does it impact the private lands and the farming system. And I think that is when we talk about commons, we are talking about the shared resources that exist in the village. And this is this actually comes in from the way land settlement has happened. In the way land settlement has happened, the what we had was private lands marked out, and all common lands were put together in different nomenclature, but with the government, with an objective that the government should take care of this, or the community should take care of this resource for common good. And if we look at this availability of commons, I would say it is in most of the marginal areas or eco-fragile areas where you would find large amounts, large areas of commons. And especially for us, commons is also important mainly because it's a platform which helps address ecological restoration, it helps economic opportunities for the poor, and it helps in bringing in social justice. I would start from social justice mainly because these are the only platform that are available for the poor and marginalized to have an equal kind of standing in any of this, in any of the platforms that they have. That is the place where they can exercise their rights equally, and strengthening that and strengthening the agency of these communities is an important component that I would say is a necessity when we are looking at working with marginalized or poorer communities. It is also the area where even if they don't hold private lands, they can actually invest and access these lands for their livelihoods. If you look at grazing systems in Rajasthan, MP, Maharashtra, in the western part, or you look at forest systems, forests that exist in the eastern part, almost 20 to 40% of their livelihood comes from these resources. And this is only economic part that I'm talking about. But if we look at the kind of dependence people have, people actually collect 30 to 40 kinds of minor forest produce, of which they only sell 5 or 6. The rest is actually consumed. And that is something that we never look at in this entire discussion on poverty and poverty alleviation. And I think that these are some of the key elements that I think make it unique. But when you are asking about the scaling bit, I think it is important for us to look at is each and every village in the country has the basic right over their commons. And today, what we are actually seeing is a larger degradation or larger encroachment of this commons in the absence of a proper governance mechanism on the ground. So how do we actually strengthen the governance of these lands through programs that exist today, be it Forest Rights Act on the ground, or be it the MGNRGA, which provides funds for community assets. I think these are important levers to actually look at and see how this can be done across states. Like states in like Karnataka, within MGNRGA, they created something like sub-plan for Gomalas, which is the grazing land there. Or in Rajasthan, you have this entire Pastoral and Development Board trying to look at the development and restoration of these pastures. These are some of the important aspects, I think, where we are trying to capture that imagination that this is necessary, not just for poorer and marginalized communities, but also it is necessity when we are looking at larger objectives of SDGs and climate change. Thank you.
Thank you, Subrataji. This was a very important submission. I think there's a lot to learn from the work that FES is doing with common property resources from a social justice perspective in its work with governments. We are seeing how the lack of access to these common property resources are also playing out in the most marginalized communities that we work with. For example, in West Bengal, we are working with the denotified, so to speak, community called Lodha Shabor. Essentially, forest fringe villages are being inhabited with gradually but surely diminishing access to these common property resources, and that creates a situation of grave economic distress for them. So a lot to learn from the work that FES is doing. I will move on to Sarojji, and of course, I mean, Pradhan's impact on basically the rural landscape, the development work in the country cannot be overstated, Sarojji, but I'm also wondering how the overall strategy of rural livelihoods, institutional governance, and the gender transformative approach that Pradhan has been known to steer is being thought of for the most marginalized.
So thanks, Sreya, and thanks the Nod Institute for providing me the opportunity to share. I think this topic itself will create a very good narrative, actually. And I must congratulate the Nod Foundation, Nod Institute for this, actually. And I think during the last month also, you have organized a conclave around this. A repeated discussion around this economic inclusion policies and the learning, actually, learning from the fields and the voices from the field would definitely bring the national priorities, and then a large-scale transformation can take place. With this, let me share our, not our achievements, but I think the reflections that and the learning that we had, actually. We are working in a very large scale, like near about 2.83 million households. And directly with, out of these 2.83 million households, we are directly working with more than 1 million households. So household means we are working with the women representative of the households. So generally our experience has been like when we are talking about a very large scale, so generally the bottom 5 to 7% are left out actually. And who are these left out? These are basically extremely vulnerable households, mainly say the PVTGs or the single-headed, single women or the oldest people or say the differently able people. So these are the households who are left out actually. So during the course of last 41 years of existence of Pradhan, we understood like livelihood has to be very comprehensive actually. So it's not only about the income actually. The income is, I think it's very necessary, but it's not sufficient. So one part is the income. This, we are talking about the Lakpati Didi. So where I think the most of the aspects like the ecological aspect which you have shared actually, and also Subrat has shared, like the natural resources we are having, like the land resource, forest resource, livestock. So all those things have to be integrated, and the inclusion perspective has to be there actually. And then you talked about this gender equality actually. So I think NRLM has promoted more than 10 crores. Women have been mobilized into these SSGs and village organizations. So how to make this organization more gender responsive actually? And from gender responsive, there is a journey towards gender transformative actually. So how these collectives can be more gender responsive organization of women, I think that is the major challenge. And the fifth part is the nutrition part actually. So if we can combine all these 5 aspects, then I think the holistic development can take place. So that is our learning. And second part is like this transformation requires time actually, time and patience. So it's not like aaj ja rahe hain aur kal ho jayega, it's not like that actually. So it requires 7 to 10 years of lifetime journey actually. Be with the family, spend time with the vulnerable households. I think she has mentioned about the wealth ranking. So these are the basic steps actually. And many a times we are, doing this well-being ranking also, like who are the most extremely vulnerable household as per the community actually. Like it's not that we are deciding that yes, you are the vulnerable household. It's not like that. Let the community decide. And this is basically the scale can achieve only if this entire approach is community-led or community-driven actually. So we are talking about this community-driven change actually. So that is how the scale is inbuilt in the entire thinking process actually. So we need to have very systems thinking perspective around all these things actually. And many a times in the CSOs or in the other actors, the approach is like project-based actually. So how we can shift this project-based approach to a mission mode and the need-based approach, I think that is the mental shift that is required actually. And also in Pradhan, we believe that we are one of the stakeholders in the entire ecosystem, but there are many stakeholders. Like we are working with BRAC International, we are working with Tricalab also. So there are many stakeholders in the entire ecosystem. And if we can collaborate with each other, learn from each other, and community-based organizations can be one of the major partners actually, like the panchayats, and the CLFs could be one of the major partners. CLF means cluster level federations. So if we can, orchestrate the partnership between CBOs, CSOs, donors, and government, and market players obviously. So then I think the large-scale transformation can take place. So that is the learning that we have. Yeah, thank you.
Sarojji, don't turn off your mic yet. I have a follow-up question for you. In our work with economic inclusion programming with the government, which also looks at the mission mandate of working with rural poor women in self-help groups and collectives, we've seen that there have been significant impacts across the spectrum of credit capitalization, access to finance and entitlements, access to livelihood portfolios, so on and so forth over the last decade or so. But I think one of the areas where a lot of thinking and recalibration needs to happen is whether we are really looking at empowering individual women in these collectives with the sense of agency and resilience, and which is where I think organizations like Pradhan, with its gender transformative approach, really looks at bringing in their experience of how to look at equipping women on the fringes with the sense of agency, resilience, to help them overcome the psychological scarcity that people on the fringes often experience. Can you speak to your experiences on the same?
So I think this is a very important question actually, and close to my heart actually. Like when we are talking about the transformation actually, so we are talking about the three things. So one is the being level changes. I mean the changes at the self level. So like when we generally go to a village, a tribal woman generally say, I cannot do this thing actually, because I do not know and then I do not have the capability. But changing her mindset over a period of time with continuous guiding or mentoring or the handholding support and a very good facilitation skill, I think over a period of time, suppose 2 years, 3 years, she says, yes, I have the confidence and I can do this thing. So this change in the mindset, like I cannot do to I can do, I think that is the being level shift, being level changes that we are looking for actually. And we have seen like, and that is the sense of agency of the individual. I am not talking about the agency of the individual, but the sense of agency of individual. And that is extremely critical. And second part is basically the knowing level changes, like the, suppose the Didi is doing the improved agriculture, so how to do this improved package of practices or the technology or the markets. So that is the knowing level changes. And third is the doing level changes. Like suppose I know ki like by doing this direct seeded rice, the productivity will increase. So how to apply this knowledge in the field? So that is the doing level changes. So while working with the women collectives, like and again the women members are not the representative of the households. So they are the, I mean, they are the individual member actually. So that approach would be very different if we say the women member is the representative of the households, because then we'll say कि अच्छा आप दादा को तो पूछ लीजिए decisions लेने के लिए. But if you understand कि she is an individual and she can take her own decision, then the approach would be very different. So and then how this approach can be like collective led, and how to make this the village organizations at like the violence against women, and then taking care of the individuals in their own village, how these village organizations can take charge of the entire village, and how they can partner with the Panchayati Raj institutions. I think these are some of the major approaches that we have learned over a period of time. Yeah.
Thank you, Sarojji. I'm going to move on to Sushant. In our previous session, we also spoke to how economic inclusion programming and approaches have brought in a fair amount of nuances and adjustments depending on the context that they serve. Gender, I think, is a lens that is additionally being layered onto some of the work on poverty graduation that we are seeking to do in India. And of course, climate resilience remains a burning issue for us to also look at. Given Trickle Up's vast experience of initiating and steering economic inclusion programming with the additional layer of climate resilience, what are the learnings from India, South Asia, that we can pick up and carry forward today, Sushant?
Yeah. Thank you for inviting me to share my experience. In Trickle Up, we basically work on 3 modes. First is we work through direct implementation, which is around 20% of our program. Majority of our program are through implementing through the local NGO partners, and most importantly through the government partnership, NRLM, SRLM, and different agency where we are providing the technical services, because we feel that alone we can't achieve our vision. And one of our values is also collaboration. So like at each stage, we like collaborate with the like-minded organization. In terms of experience, I'll summarize all the for global experience. We work in Asia, Latin America, and West African country. The most important thing which we found that the designing of program is most important thing. In fact, we are often asked by donors, why do you take so much of time in designing the program? And we realize that if you don't design a program, you struggle throughout the project phase, and ultimately your outcome and like output is not what you had intended. So as we move, we have learned, because initially like everything is difficult before it is easy. So because of our compassion, passion, and that missionary zeal, we want to make all the difficult things as easy. And as you know, that Trickle Up is a global organization which exclusively work with the ultra poor. So, and working with ultra poor is not something very easy. So globally, we have adopted a approach called graduation approach. We are the part of CGAP Ford Foundation, and we started our graduation journey in way back in 2008, and from that we have been globally implementing this program. What we realized that the participatory approach, and unless until the community is the center, nothing will happen. That's what has been our biggest learning. We also feel that understanding the community, understanding the need, understanding the local context, the cultural norms, and political environment also, I add, is very important what we do. I'll just give you example. If suppose this is a PBTG area or a tribal village in remote Jharkhand, so if there are 200 families, so through our PAT exercise, PRA, around 20 families are selected. So each 20 will not be treated in a same way. Like in the sense, these 20 families has got 20 kind of different background. So we start with aspiration building, vision building. Sometimes we go and see that we want to like work with you. They say, no, we are very happy. We don't want any kind of support. But you feel when you go inside their home and come back, on the way you think what they are going to eat in the evening, and these are the families with whom we work, even they don't get one square meal a day. So the most important thing is to like understand the context. So like if we have selected the 20 families, so the aspiration need of 20 families is different. You can't just go and give 5 goats to everybody and tomorrow you see, okay, things have like changed. So we do individual livelihood planning with all 20 families. So keeping the need of the community is our focus, and then adaptation. That's why we say that one size doesn't fit well. In fact, even I've seen in 2 PVTG who are joining villages, the approach we do in one village, you cannot replicate the same in another village because of many considerations. So one of the thing which we have globally learned, that participatory approach, your community is the key, your focus. And as we most importantly work, we don't use the word beneficiary, we use the word project participant. So 100% of our project participants are women globally. So either this is women household, women with disability. So we work with those family. We have few programs with people with disability where we have some main project participant, but we also ensure that the benefit goes to the entire family.
Sushant, talk to us a little bit more about what was the thinking behind introducing climate resilience as an additional layer, and what are the key takeaways from the South experience, the Latin American experience. What can we learn from climate resilience programming layered on graduation in India?
It's a question these days within our office,
yes,
within our team.
It's a loaded question,
We discuss every day. In fact, when we started graduation, so climate resilience, adaptation, or mitigation was not a part of this graduation approach. But as we moved, we realized that the ultra-poor communities are the one who are getting most affected by the climate change in terms of weather pattern, agriculture pattern, in terms of disaster. So we had a round of discussions and consultation with the community with whom we work, and we realized in terms of climate change, we don't have much knowledge, but they have most of the knowledge. And like, I'm very happy to share at this platform that our climate change strategy is mostly done by those project participants with whom we work, not we. We just facilitated. So it was like promotion of indigenous knowledge and like adding some modern techniques. So we decided that as a graduation approach is all about livelihood. So we thought that the livelihoods are getting affected. So that also gave us, it was the blessings in disguise. We thought that one livelihood option will not work. So we started on multiple diversified livelihood, and then we focused on climate resilient agriculture, climate resilient livestock, and like wherever we are working, we have a model of making that village a climate smart village. So those seeds are germinated, but we have invested a lot too. I like to emphasize that climate change, just talking about climate change will not change the situation. We have invested a lot in building our own capacity, because as an organization, we didn't have like capacity expertise on climate change. And we also invested a lot with those community with whom we like work. And at most of the places where we had program for more than 1 year, so those programs are our climate resilient program.
Thank you so much, Sushant. We will circle back to you on maybe a conversation offline on what are some of the metrics that you have looked at while designing these climate smart villages for ultra poor and how these can be sustainably scaled. But I'll move to the second piece of this conversation, where we begin to talk about questions of scale and sustainability. And my opening question to all panelists is that where there are questions of survival at stake for the most marginalized, is scale, sustainability, having ambitions of scaling and sustainability, are they at all relevant?
I would actually, when we're discussing about the scale and sustainability, I think if we are looking at the unit of change, whether it is village or SHG or this one, it is something like each and every village needs it. It's not like one can move without such intervention. And when we're saying that, the only issue that we face is when we discuss about scale is we are wary about diversity. We usually try and see the outcomes in the same way that it happens in village 1 should be replicated in village 2 or in village 3. But actually where we are working, each village actually responds differently. Each village has its unique conditions, and they would respond to a particular issue in a very different way, which suits them, suits their, and because it also has been a historical learning within the community. It is not the program design that can determine what outcomes that can happen. And that, I think, is a large difference where what is the change on the ground that communities are looking at and what programs are looking at. And can we bring in that coherence and that kind of thing? I think that is important when we're looking at it.
I'm going to ask the other participants to also respond to the same question, but I think very important point that you have raised in that mere linear replication of models and designs over increasing geographies does not amount to scale, or it does not amount to the kind of deep scaling that we aspire towards in our work with diverse contexts of marginality. Sarojji, please, your comments.
Yeah, I think when we are designing some projects, basically we need to look into what works at scale, not scaling up actually. So personally, I think scale is very important, but I think context, it varies from context to context, people to people actually. So we need to have a flexibility in the approach, first thing. Second thing is when we're talking about the ultra poor, so each individual is very unique actually, and they're very different. So we need to have a family-based approach. At the same time, I mean, family-based approach means what is their need, what are the resources they have, what is their aspirations, and then what are the opportunities available in the local areas. So I think all those factors have to be taken into considerations. And third part is basically we need to have a targeted investment for each of these households actually. I mean, targeted investment means we cannot say for if you are ultra poor household, so 75,000 rupees would suffice the purpose. Or if we are designing a project like 35,000, suppose some of the funding agencies asked us what is the investment required? So you design a project accordingly, but it's very difficult to say but some of the funding, they are also understand the situation and they understand you take an untied fund and then see what is the learning, and then can the learning be replicated in the other areas actually. So I think when we talk about the scale, we need to see what are the processes that we can scale up actually, not the numbers actually. So in this case, I think the numbers will be achieved if we are focusing on the processes actually. This is the main thing actually. And second is, I think we need to have a very good evidence-based research actually. I mean, what worked with the ultra-poor households or with the single woman-headed households. So I think we need to understand what are the triggering factors that worked actually, and what are the factors that needs improvement. If we can understand all these things, then I think we can design a program around this, and that can be taken up in a very large scale. So that is my understanding actually. And obviously to do this in a very large scale, again we need to do a multi-stakeholder partnerships actually. One single agency or organizations or any other agency cannot do all these things actually. Yeah.
Very, very important submissions, Sarojji. Marcella, if I can go to you with the same question.
Okay. Talking about scale, on the one hand, and talking about also the scaling up of benefits to the most vulnerable. I think these two are important. And at the same time, I will still say, we need to look at the scale of how do we build the resilience of the entire system that is there. Because it is this system that is actually providing livelihoods. What we have realized over the time is talking about the system and the landscape. We need to look at it in a very, and I'll agree with you all, it is very unique in every location. So we have taken now an approach of looking at an ecosystem-based approach. Because the forest land is very distinct from earlier what we inherited, the wastelands or the barren lands were actually the pasture lands. And a lot of these, the landscape needs to be revived and rejuvenated the way it naturally is, rather than destroy the system as it is. We look at a way in which we bring the entire village community together. And the reason why it is, we need to help those who have water resources, for example, not to exploit and over-exploit them, so that the water is then shared as a common pool resource where others can benefit. These are some of the very little intricacies that one has to do. The challenge I am looking at actually in scaling up the benefits, particularly of the benefits in a climate context also. We have this context we cannot avoid. looking at it, there are a lot of programs that are coming up that are reaching out to individual households that do capacity building of individual households. What is missed out is the whole community that needs to manage its resources. The land, while it is owned by individuals, this is the approach we are following. While the land is owned by individuals, the landscape is a common resource. What happens in my land will affect your land, will affect the lower villages, will be affected by the others. We are in a shared problem. We cannot run away from this. The more we decentralize, the more we break up into individual ownership, it is owned by individuals, but treated as a common, because the pests from one farm will go to the others if the good practices are not followed by all. And I think this is an approach what we are strongly looking at is how do the communities get the benefit? How do the farmers and individuals get the benefit? And how do the marginalized households get the benefit when treating the land from an ecosystem perspective? What we have started doing also is working closely with the government of Maharashtra, and we have an MOUs with them to see how we can have the ecosystem-based approach to be taken up and upscaled so that we can all can adapt to climate change, and at the same time we are looking at sustainability for tomorrow.
Very, very important point. I think there are interesting models around this ecosystem approach that are also being carried out in landscape management projects like the payment for eco-services, system services model, etc. So a lot of promising possibilities ahead. Sushant, your thoughts on scale, what should determine our scale ambitions while working with the most marginalized at the fringes? What are some of the enablers? What are some of the inhibitors? Your thoughts?
First of all, we have to understand scaling is not replication, or scaling is just not numbers. When we started scaling our program, the very first thing came over numbers, and we lose the touch that quality will be compromised. So we had lots of discussion on this. So we realized that for scaling, putting processes and system is most important. And also when you scale, you cannot do it alone. That was very much visible that you can't do it alone. So what we realized that every community, every village we work, has got different kind of need, challenges, problems, ways of mitigation and opportunities. So like when you scale up, so these kind of challenges come. Although we work on graduation, but we also derived a way that how these challenges would be mitigated through the community institution. And we also realize that PRI plays a very important role. Our local self-governments, we have local self-governments in different countries. People call it different, but I'm focusing on India. For sustainability and scaling, we feel that PRI is the best tool, community, resource, stakeholder to sustain your program, because we are there for 3 years, 5 years, 7 years, and then we're. I'll give you an example of the program which we are doing with Pradhan in Jharkhand. That program is called Ultra Poor Responsive Panchayat. So the first time in the history of India, a program has been started where we are orienting the PRI members to target ultra poor families.
Fascinating.
So and in 1 year time, there's a great result we can see, and we want to scale it up with it, in each state, I would say.
Thank you. Excellent. Excellent to hear about your ultra poor responsive panchayats. I think yesterday we were part of government conversations where states were also coming in very strongly to think of what can be innovative processes that help in identification, enumeration, targeting of the poorest of the poor, apart from the mechanisms that are already available. And let's hope that this model also replicates in due course of time. We are running out of time. We have 5 minutes left. I want to end this conversation by asking each of the panelists quick 1.5 minute submission on what are the 3 standout ideas that you have for both policy and practitioners on economic inclusion programming in India, if we were to arrive at top 3 ideas that we could share as an outcome of this panel.
What I've picked up over here from the other panelists too is the first thing we need to be outcome-based. And the outcome is not the same in every area. It is unique for each area. So the outcome is, how do we reach the poorest? How do they come up to the levels of their expectations and at the same time address climate change? Just keep it.
Sushant.
Well, in fact, I'll say, based on our experience, that systemic barrier and market access, we felt, is one of the most important thing for the ultra-poor communities. Inclusive governance and community participation, which is badly missing in most of the government program, even in some of the private-led program. And third, most importantly, which we all are suffering these is that environmental sustainability and climate adaptation program. These 3 recommendation is there.
Well taken, Sushant. Saroj ji.
Yeah. So I think whenever we design any program, so there are 3 levels of changes. So one is the people level changes, the system level changes, and the organizational level changes. So the top 3 recommendations that I would like to give is, one is the how to trigger these community-led processes. I think, I mean, leverage the strength of SSGs already mobilized into NRLM, and the collaboration between Panchayat and CBOs. So I think that is the first thing. Second is involve good CSOs in the entire processes, so that the capacity building, training, mentoring, and all the supports can be provided. Because I don't think any single agency can do all these things actually. And third is targeted investments. Like how we can ensure the investment so that, I mean, investment from any kind, like from the market also investment can come. And I don't think, like, for in the initial stage, the ultra-poor household, they are mostly in the resignation state actually. And how they can be a stage of hope and, I mean, aspiration, aspire. So I think that is the level of shift that we are looking for. And loan-based product can be introduced, but I think those can be at a very later stage actually. So these are the top 3 recommendations.
Thank you, Saroj.
And also the last one is basically how to, I mean, do a large-scale partnerships around this narrative. That is very critical actually.
Shubrata ji.
Sir, I have actually more questions than answers. Mainly because...
Absolutely, please go ahead.
Mainly because I think if we look at a long term, and when we're looking at long term in terms of who is going to take care of the poverty in these villages, it is the local governments that has to take the responsibility. If we are reaching individuals, are we actually breaking the way that it should happen, or because we are reaching out to individuals to improve their livelihoods directly through programs, or should it be through institutions like panchayats or village institutions which have to take that larger responsibility of looking at social justice within them? And I think that is a key when we are looking at a longer term kind of objective, while at a shorter term addressing it looks okay, but when the question of sustainability comes in, I think it's the responsibility of those local governments which have to be emphasized and taken forward.
So this is a perfect, you've set me up for a perfect segue into the audience questions, where I think one question, and I'll start with you, Subrataji, because you directly addressed that in your last piece. Strategies for localization of SDGs and partnerships between CBO PRIs to achieve SDG targets. How can this be achieved?
So I think I'll just extend what I was saying is to look at panchayats as local government and not implementing bodies. And if we are looking at panchayats as local government, they are supposed to take responsibility of not implementation of schemes, but to see whether the resources are in order, to see whether the soil is good, to see whether the agriculture that is happening that is better, or to see where each individual in the village has a better quality of life.
Excellent. Sarojji, I have a question that is directed at you.
Can I add to this? Actually? Yeah.
Go ahead.
So I think there has been a lots of planning at the Gram Panchayat and village level, like village BPRP, then Gram Panchayat Development Plan, GPDP. So initially it was Village Poverty Reduction Plan. Now this name has changed actually.
Yes.
Village Prosperity Resilience Plan actually. So I think lots of time are being spent by the community resource person or the government officials or the CSOs around this planning exercise. Can we do this in a very simple step, like one panchayat, one plan? I mean, they do not have to plan in each and every year actually. Like in the BPRP, the entire process has been repeated for last 5 years, and it's a repetitive exercise actually. And nothing is coming out of this. And then BPRP has been anchored by the RT department, GPDP is anchored by the Panchayati Raj department, but there is no coordination or convergence between in these two. Yeah, they do not talk to each other actually. I mean, so that is the real challenge actually. But if we go to the community, the single household, and they, in their mind, it's very simple. Like I will have the water resources, and then I will go for the improved agriculture. So they do not think like he is coming from the agriculture department, I am coming from the forest department, and he is coming from the say RD department. It's not like that actually. So from the villagers' perspective, if we can converge all these things at the grassroots level, then I think the leveraging of the government flagship program or the investment from the programs like NREGA or NRLM, that won't be very difficult, and we have very good experience around that actually. Yeah. The
timer is flashing an angry red at me, but I will direct 2 quick questions, one each to Sushant and Marcella before we wrap up. With CSR funds being deployed on a year-on-year basis in select geographies, with no patience, capital, and no long-term commitment, how do you really see inclusion of ultra-poor happening? Marcella, if you would want to take this.
I'm sorry, I don't know whether I will be a little rude. Sometimes I wonder with short-term funds, whether we as NGOs are expected to get things out like a factory. And that is a big challenge we face. But on the other hand, what we are trying different ways of doing it is, while there is this common goal, you need, and rightly as you said, just 2 years, 3 years, 5 years is not sufficient. It is a behavioral change that we are looking at. And this behavioral change is embedded with a lot of history.
Yes.
You know, of centuries. And this requires, so approaches that we look at is, how do we dovetail different projects and schemes with the common aim of, you know, getting that outcome we want, and giving it the time that it needs. And I think these are the ways that we look at, you know, channelizing funds with a common aim, and different years having different funding sources that fit into what that overall outcome expected is required.
Sushant, one last question before we wrap up. And I think it's pertinent that you answer it with Trickle Up's legacy of working on graduation coaching and the innovations you've brought into the space. How do you customize capacity building at scale when we say each household is different? How can the hand-holding change for each of them?
This is a very interesting question, and we all struggle, including our frontline workers. In Trickle Up, if you see our measure expenses, so these expenses, we don't call it expenses, it's an investment on the capacity building of the frontline worker. In fact, in many of the villages where we work, where we find a digital coach or like even some young girl, young boy who can do, so like we don't have a single literate person in that village. So we have, here we use mostly digital technology, the role of technology. We have also developed our package of practices app, which comes because in many of the areas we work, still there is no electricity and there is no network. But our apps are offline apps, so like you can use it, and these all apps are on video form, and these are in several languages, including Ho, Santhali, and many other tribal languages. So our customization of the training is 60% same, but 40% when the question comes of technical part, it's different of livestock, agriculture, and so like that's where we like invest 60% on softer skills, marketing skill, and 40% goes as a customization for the
Thank you. Time is up. Thank you to this brilliant panel. Made my job as a moderator very, very easy. And of course, to the audience, you've been fabulous. Even if you've been redirected to Stein at the very last minute. Thank you all.
Thank you so much, Shreya. Thank you to this esteemed panel for that fascinating charcha on the various different factors that we need to take into consideration as we scale the EIP program. Thank you so much. We have a small token of appreciation. So if I could request you guys to stay on stage. And thank you to the audience. Request you all to please scan the QR code at the back of the agenda to share your feedback with us. We will have a 8-minute break and have the last session after that.